In 1987, a retired Army engineer named Gerald Pruitt was mapping underwater limestone formations along a forgotten stretch of the lower Mississippi River when his sonar equipment picked up something that made no sense. At a depth of nearly 40 feet below the riverbed, beneath layers of silt, clay, and compressed sediment that hadn't been disturbed in centuries, there was a hollow. A large one. Gerald surfaced, radioed his contact at Louisiana State University, and within 3 weeks a small team of archaeologists was lowering themselves into a dark, water-sealed chamber that the river had been silently guarding for what researchers would later estimate to be over 800 years. What they found inside that cave changed the way a lot of serious historians think about pre-Columbian America, and most people have never heard a single word about it. Today we're going through all 30 objects recovered from that chamber, including the one that a federal agency actually requested be kept off the public record for nearly 6 years. Stay with me, because number 7 on this list made a room full of professional archaeologists go completely silent. If you haven't subscribed yet, do that right now, because we cover the history they didn't teach you in school, every single week. Number 30 was the first thing the divers' lights hit when they entered the chamber. A ceramic water vessel, roughly the size of a large cooking pot, sitting perfectly upright on a natural stone shelf, as if someone had placed it there yesterday. The clay composition matched techniques used by the Mississippian culture, the great mound-building civilization that dominated the central and southern United States between roughly 800 and 1600 CE. What made this particular vessel unusual wasn't its shape or even its remarkable preservation. It was the residue found dried inside the walls. Lab analysis came back with traces of copper sulfate compounds, which archaeologists associate with ritual purification ceremonies, not everyday water storage. Someone carried that vessel into that cave not to drink from it, but to use it in a ceremony they considered important enough to leave permanently sealed underground. Number 29 was a carved antler tool with a beveled edge, the kind used for pressure flaking flint and chert into projectile points. Antler tools like this were workhorses of indigenous material culture across North America, but the preservation state of this one was extraordinary. The organic material had survived because the cave maintained a near-constant humidity and temperature, shielded from the oxidizing effects of open air. Under magnification, researchers could still see micro-scratches consistent with heavy use on the working edge, meaning this wasn't a ceremonially deposited object. It was someone's actual tool, worn from real work, placed deliberately into a sealed underground space for reasons that had nothing to do with convenience. Number 28 was a small bundle of what turned out to be dried botanical material, wrapped in woven plant fiber. The wrapping itself had largely decomposed, but enough remained to identify a twill weave pattern consistent with Mississippian textile traditions. The botanicals inside were more surprising. The bundle contained seeds from 3 separate plant species, 2 of them native to regions hundreds of miles away from where the cave was located. This isn't unusual in the context of indigenous trade networks, which were far more extensive and sophisticated than most Americans are taught. But combined with the other objects in this chamber, it added to a picture of a space that was used by people with wide-ranging connections and deliberate, organized intent. Number 27 was a flat piece of imported Gulf Coast shell, roughly the size of a human palm, engraved with a series of concentric circles and crosshatch marks. Shell engraving was a major artistic tradition among Mississippian peoples, and objects like this have been found at sites across the Southeast. But this one came from a cave in the lower Mississippi corridor, sealed beneath the riverbed. The engraving style matched a regional variant associated with ceremonial exchange networks, meaning this piece likely traveled through multiple hands before it ended up in that chamber. Shell objects were prestige goods. They didn't get casually misplaced. Number 26 was a chunky stone, a smooth, disc-shaped stone specifically manufactured for a game that was one of the most socially significant competitive activities in Mississippian culture. Chunky was played across vast distances and served social and diplomatic functions far beyond simple recreation. Finding one in a sealed ceremonial deposit suggests either that this particular stone had significance beyond the game itself, or that the game and whatever happened in that cave were connected in ways that we can't fully reconstruct from the physical evidence alone. The stone was made from quartzite that didn't originate locally, which meant it had been brought to that location intentionally. Number 25 was a copper repoussé plate fragment, thin sheets of hammered copper worked into decorative or ceremonial shapes. Mississippian copperwork is some of the most technically impressive metalwork produced anywhere in pre-Columbian North America, and it almost always appears in elite or ceremonial contexts. This fragment depicted what appeared to be a partial bird figure, possibly a falcon or eagle motif that was common in the southeastern ceremonial complex, a religious and artistic tradition that connected societies across a huge geographic area. Copper like this came from the Great Lakes region, meaning it had traveled a very long way before ending up in a sealed cave beneath a river in Louisiana. Number 24 was a polished stone palette, a flat worked stone surface used for grinding pigments. Red and black residue was still visible in the grinding surface. Ochre-based red pigments and carbon-based blacks were foundational to Mississippian ritual art. Palettes like this appeared in high-status burials and ceremonial deposits across the culture area. The fact that this one still had pigment residue after all those centuries was a direct result of the cave's sealed, stable environment. Number 23 was a ceramic effigy vessel in the shape of a crouching human figure. These objects are among the most recognizable and studied artifacts of the Mississippian tradition. They appear throughout the archaeological record of the central and southeastern United States and are consistently associated with ceremonial and mortuary contexts. The face of this particular figure was unusual in its detail, with incised lines suggesting facial tattooing or body paint markings that would have carried specific social meaning within the culture that produced it. Number 22 was a bundle of worked mica sheets, thin, semi-transparent mineral layers that had been cut and shaped. Mica was quarried in the Appalachian Mountains and traded extensively across eastern North America for thousands of years. In Mississippian contexts, it appears in elite deposits and is often associated with reflective or luminescent ritual significance, the idea that the shimmering quality of mica had spiritual properties. Finding a deliberate bundle of shaped mica pieces in a sealed underground chamber fits that pattern precisely. Number 21 was a section of knotted cordage, plant fiber rope with deliberate knot patterns that researchers spent considerable time analyzing. Certain knot configurations in pre-Columbian contexts have been associated with record-keeping or message-carrying functions in other indigenous traditions across the Americas. Whether that applied here is genuinely uncertain, but the knots were not random. They were deliberate, patterned, and repeated in a sequence that suggested intentional information encoding rather than simple utility tying. Number 20 was a celt, a ground stone axe head without a groove for hafting, made from a particularly hard greenstone that had to come from geological deposits well outside the local area. Celts appear throughout Mississippian archaeological contexts in a range of sizes, from functional working tools to miniaturized ceremonial versions. This one fell in a middle range, large enough to have been functional but polished to a degree that suggested it was valued beyond simple utility. Number 19 was a pair of ear spools, cylindrical objects designed to be worn as ear ornaments through stretched earlobe piercings. Ear spools in Mississippian culture were markers of status and social identity. This pair was made from a combination of stone and shell materials and showed clear evidence of long wear before being deposited. Someone wore these regularly, for years or possibly decades, and then placed them deliberately into this sealed space. If you're getting a sense that this cave was not a random storage spot, but a carefully chosen and intentionally sealed repository, you're reading the evidence correctly. Number 18 was a ground stone discoidal bead cache. Dozens of small stone beads that had been strung and worn as a necklace or multiple strand ornament before the stringing material decomposed, leaving them in a loose cluster. Bead production at Mississippian sites was a specialized craft activity. These were made from a variety of stone types, several of which were not locally available. Assembling a string of beads from materials gathered across a wide trade network was itself a form of expressing cosmopolitan connections. If you've made it this far, and you're finding this as fascinating as I am, drop a comment below telling me which object on this list surprises you most. We're only halfway through and things are about to get considerably stranger. Number 17 was a fragment of burned and incised bone, specifically a segment of what appeared to be a large bird bone that had been deliberately marked with geometric incisions before being placed in the fire. Burned and marked bone objects appear in ritual deposits across a wide range of indigenous North American traditions and are consistently interpreted as having ceremonial significance. The specific incision pattern on this fragment didn't match any documented iconographic tradition precisely, which either meant it was highly localized, very early, or simply not yet catalogued in the comparative literature. Number 16 was a miniature ceramic vessel, only about 3 inches tall, with a sealed opening that had been deliberately plugged with clay and then fired closed. When researchers carefully opened it, they found a small quantity of red ochre powder inside. Sealed miniature containers appear in mortuary and ceremonial contexts across multiple indigenous traditions and are often interpreted as containing substances considered spiritually potent or symbolically charged. The fact that this one was fired closed, permanently sealing the pigment inside, suggested that whoever made it intended the contents to remain sealed indefinitely. Number 15 was a worked piece of galena, a heavy, silvery gray lead ore mineral that was mined and traded extensively in the greater Midwest and Mississippi Valley region during the Mississippian period. Galena appears frequently in ceremonial deposits and is often associated with divination practices. Its reflective, mirror-like surface when freshly worked may have contributed to beliefs about its ritual significance. This piece had been deliberately shaped into a roughly spherical form and showed polish from handling. Number 14 was a carved wooden object, one of very few organic materials in the collection that had survived in anything close to its original form. It was a small effigy figure, roughly 8 inches tall, made from what wood analysis identified as cedar. Cedar was spiritually significant across many Eastern North American indigenous traditions. The figure was humanoid with abstract features and showed traces of red pigment. The preservation of this wooden object in a sealed, water-protected cave environment after 800 years was remarkable. Number 13 was a cache of prepared flint bifaces, carefully made bifacially flaked stone tools that had been so thoroughly thinned and refined that most were past the point of practical functionality. They were too thin and delicate to use as actual tools without risk of breaking. Objects like this are called eccentrics, or prestige bifaces in the archaeological literature, and are understood as demonstrations of extreme technical skill, valued for their own sake or for ritual purposes. If this list is making you see pre-Columbian America differently than you did 20 minutes ago, hit subscribe now. We do this kind of deep dive history every week, and there's a lot more where this came from. Number 12 was a fragment of woven textile preserved through contact with copper objects in the deposit. Copper has antimicrobial properties that can dramatically slow organic decomposition, which is how textile fragments sometimes survive in archaeological contexts where they otherwise wouldn't. This fragment showed a complex weave structure that researchers described as technically sophisticated, requiring a level of loom setup and weaving skill that indicated specialized craft knowledge. The fiber was identified as plant-based, most likely a native species processed using techniques that required significant preparation time. Number 11 was a carved limestone tablet approximately the size of a hardcover book, with incised markings on both faces. The markings on one face appeared to be a map or spatial diagram, with lines and circles in configurations that bore resemblance to diagrams of waterways and elevated landforms. The other face had marks that researchers interpreted as potentially calendrical, repeating units and patterns consistent with lunar or agricultural cycle tracking. Tablets like this are extraordinarily rare in Mississippian archaeology, and the combination of apparent spatial and temporal recording on a single portable stone object generated significant academic discussion. Number 10 was a set of 4 ceramic smoking pipes, each slightly different in design but clearly made by the same hand or within the same workshop tradition. Tobacco smoking was central to ceremonial life across many Eastern North American indigenous traditions. Pipes carried deep ritual significance and were used in diplomatic, spiritual, and social contexts. Finding 4 of them together, in a consistent style, suggested they may have been a set used for specific ceremonial purposes that required multiple implements. Number 9 was a human tooth pendant, a single molar that had been perforated at the root for suspension and showed traces of red pigment. Human tooth ornaments appear in Mississippian archaeological contexts and are typically interpreted as belonging to the realm of ancestral veneration or the marking of significant social relationships. Whether this represented a connection to a specific individual or was valued in a more general symbolic sense is impossible to determine from the physical evidence alone. Number 8 was a polished bone needle cache. 17 needles of varying sizes made from animal bone, still sharp after centuries in the sealed cave environment. Needles this fine indicate textile and leather working at a high skill level. The fact that they were deposited together as a cache, rather than as scattered individual losses, suggested they were placed deliberately, perhaps as a set belonging to a specific individual, or representing a craft tradition being honored or memorialized. Number 7 was the object that stopped the room. When researchers carefully cleared sediment from around a flat stone in the back portion of the cave, they found beneath it a ceramic vessel of a type that had never been documented in the Mississippian archaeological record. The form combined elements of two distinct regional traditions in a way that was theoretically possible, but had never actually been recovered in physical form. More significantly, the iconography painted on its surface incorporated symbols that appeared in both Mississippian and a separate, geographically distant tradition, in a combination that implied direct, sustained contact between two groups that the prevailing academic models at the time did not connect. A federal cultural preservation agency requested that detailed imagery from this object be withheld from publication for nearly 6 years, while consultation processes were completed with relevant tribal nations. When the imagery was finally published in 2003, the academic response was, to put it diplomatically, intense. Number 6 was a worked crystal, a piece of clear quartz that had been deliberately shaped and polished into a roughly oval form. Quartz crystals appear with remarkable consistency in ceremonial deposits across indigenous North American traditions spanning thousands of years. The transparent, internally complex nature of crystal was widely associated with vision, perception, and access to non-ordinary states of awareness. This piece was large enough and worked with enough care to have been a significant personal possession for whoever carried it into that chamber. Number 5 was a ceramic rattle in the form of a turtle, the shell section of the turtle body forming the sealed chamber that contained small fired clay pellets. Turtle imagery was deeply significant across many Eastern North American indigenous traditions and often associated with themes of creation, stability, and the foundational layer of the world. This rattle was complete and functional. After 800 years of sitting sealed in a cave beneath a river, you could still hear the pellets move when it was gently tilted. Number 4 was a bundle of red cedar bark that retained enough of its aromatic compounds to be identified by smell when the sealed cave was first entered. Cedar was burned for purification and used in ceremony across a wide range of indigenous North American traditions. The preservation of aromatic properties in plant material after this length of time was startling to the researchers who first encountered it. It was, by all accounts, the first thing several of them mentioned when describing what it felt like to enter that space. Number 3 was a carved stone pipe in the form of a kneeling human figure, the bowl located in the figure's back and the stem hole passing through its body. Effigy pipes of this type are among the most studied and celebrated objects in the Mississippian archaeological record. Well-preserved examples fetch extraordinary prices on the antiquities market, which has been a serious problem for the scientific study of these objects throughout the 20th century. This one, found in a legally and scientifically controlled excavation context, was one of the few examples recovered with full documentation of its archaeological associations. Number 2 was a copper falcon tablet, a large, flat piece of hammered copper cut and worked into the shape of a spread-winged falcon figure with detailed incised feather patterns. The falcon was one of the most powerful and consistent images in the southeastern ceremonial complex, associated with warrior identity, solar power, and elite status. Large copper falcon pieces are known from only a handful of sites and are among the rarest and most significant objects in the entire corpus of Mississippian material culture. Finding one in a sealed, undisturbed cave context gave researchers access to something that most archaeological copper only provides in fragmentary or secondhand form, a complete object whose entire history of deposition was observable and documentable. Number 1 was a stone tablet, approximately 14 inches by 10 inches, made from a fine-grained sandstone that had been carefully smoothed on both faces. On one face, covering nearly the entire surface in dense, carefully incised markings, was what appeared to be a structured system of notation. The marks were organized into rows and columns, with recurring elements and clear structural patterning that was consistent with a writing or proto-writing system. This was not random or decorative. Researchers who examined it described it as exhibiting the formal properties associated with recorded information, specifically the kind of deliberate, systematic visual encoding that distinguishes writing from art. The tablet became one of the most debated objects in the study of pre-Columbian North American communication systems. It did not resolve the debate about whether the Mississippians had writing. It intensified it. Every major researcher who has examined the original object in person has come away certain of one thing. Whoever made those marks was not doodling. They were recording something specific, something they considered important enough to seal in a stone chamber beneath a river, where they believed it would wait, undisturbed, until someone was ready to understand it again. We still don't know if we're ready, but we know the marks are there, and we know they mean something. That's the part that keeps archaeologists up at night. 30 objects. One sealed cave. 800 years of silence beneath the Mississippi River. What you've seen today is not fringe history or speculation. These are documented, peer-reviewed, institutionally preserved artifacts that most Americans have never heard of, because the history of this continent before European contact is still, in most educational systems, treated as a footnote. It isn't a footnote, it's the main story, and the Mississippi River has been telling it for 1,000 years, to anyone patient enough to look beneath the surface. If any one of these objects made you stop and think differently about what happened here before 1492, tell me in the comments which one hit hardest for you. I read every single one. And if you want more history like this, the kind they didn't put in the textbooks, you know what to do.